Welcome to a decisions training video about external truth tables. External truth tables are a great way to use truth tables in such a way that you can have your data sourced from outside pieces of information instead of manually building them. So we're going to talk about how to actually grab these and start building with external truth tables. So first of all, let's talk about what an external truth table is and some of the main differences that it will have between regular truth tables. So basically, it's a type of truth table, so it works in the same way with rows and columns, but the data itself is actually populated by some kind of external source, a source that's not just in the truth table editor itself. Now, these external sources can be external databases, they can be from an API integration of some kind, they can come from an Excel spreadsheet or a CSV or something like that. They can even just be on another data type that is already built within Decisions. But anything that Decisions can report on, you can build an external truth table for. So all of these items are great ways if you're trying to get that information out from somewhere else to build your truth tables. To simply populate the rows in this, you just need to have a report set up in Decisions that has specific data fields, and then those data fields and the rows will correspond with what ends up getting placed in your truth tables, data fields, and rows. So just as a little comparison, a couple things to take note of with regular truth tables and external truth tables. So truth tables, cells are populated manually, right? You have to add each of your columns and each of your rows that you want. You have to put what you want to have in those things. They can be dynamic and coming from some outside source, or they can be static, but you have to individually map every single cell to what it is supposed to be. So you can make a completely static truth table and then set that up. You can make a completely dynamic truth table with all the items in it being dynamic, but the problem with it being dynamic is you still have to set that up individually. With an external truth table, all of the cells, every single cell is automatically populated by that report that it is being sourced from. So that kind of data gets placed in there automatically based on whatever's in the report. You don't have to set each individual cell up. With a truth table, all of the items that you need to actually edit it, and you need to have designer permissions to do so. So there's no way of having a non-designer edit your truth table in that way. You need to open up the truth table, start working on it, and making those changes and editing those things within it. Whereas with an external truth table, it's a little bit different because since everything is sourced externally, someone else that doesn't have access to Decisions could make changes on that external source, on the external database, or wherever else that data is coming from the files or whatever. That data can then be changed into the truth table from someone else outside, which could be good or bad depending on your use cases. On truth tables, your cells also have a lot more actions that you can use, so you can customize the different types of actions that are available. If you want this column to run a flow or do some other changes and different things like that, changing text, outputting other pieces of data in different ways. There's a lot more options that you could do with truth tables. And then also just the initial setup, a little bit less complex because you don't have to go out of your way to set up the connections with the external source or anything. You just simply are adding rows and columns and placing in the data that you want to place in. With an external truth table, it's a little easier to have that data come through. So it's a little bit more complex to set up initially because you have to make sure that you have the report and everything connected properly and you have your data coming through as you want it. But it afterwards, it's a little bit easier to manage and control because now that it's already set up, that data just gets passed through as changes are made. You don't have to make any as much manual changes and things afterwards. It's also a little bit easier to manage those larger sets of data. It's a little bit easier to create a truth table, uh, with this external source because you only have to create it once, and then adding millions and hundreds of other options afterwards, make it a lot easier. A truth table with 100 rows and columns is going to be very frustrating to build out manually, but an external truth table makes that a lot easier to do. So there's a couple of pros and cons in either direction depending on what you want it. A really simple truth table, probably no need to use an external truth table for it. But the more complex ones might be a little bit easier, but there might be some limitations. So some things you have to consider when you're building. But let's jump over to Decisions and take a closer look at how to actually make one and utilize external truth tables. So to create a truth table for an external truth table is pretty easy. It's just type of rule. So if I go to create rule and you see if I go to truth tables, there is an external data truth table that I can create. So I can easily create this to demonstrate how I can create an external truth table. And once I build it, you'll see a couple differences if you're used to building with truth tables in decisions. For starters, I don't have the obvious just add more items down here that I normally have, or add more items across the top. I can add more rows and columns and things as needed, but the or rows I cannot add. I don't have the ability. You'll notice it also tells me that truth data table data needs updating, telling me that I can edit the report. So I actually need to edit the report in here to make sure that this report is working properly. And I can do that by clicking on the edit over here or this edit report that it shows me. So in here is just a regular report, and this is where we actually get to develop the report that is going to source our truth table. You'll notice a couple things showing here that certain fields are actually required in the data fields. These actually have to correspond with fields in the truth table itself. So you can see default output data is the first one you see that is matching this data right here. So the items have to actually match between both data fields. But let me go ahead and add my data source here. I'm just going to grab this database structure that I have called user example, and then I can add any fields that are related to this user example. So I can grab, let's say I want my email addresses to appear, my first names and my last names, anything like that. I still need to have some default output data added. And if you're not sure what that is, we can go back and we can take a look at the other example to show. But essentially what we can do is we can actually change any of these values to match a specific field if we need to as well, and change the names of these. But let's go back and we'll fix this up later, and we'll take a look at everything on the inside here. So here is where we build out the truth table. There's still a couple elements that are necessary in order to track and build with this. So we do need to take some kind of input in here to actually tell the truth table what we are assessing, and then what data is going to get output from the truth table. This part does need configuring. It's just the rows itself that we don't configure, that we don't have to worry about. So let me go ahead and add something in here. Let's say I want the to check details about email addresses. So I'm going to type email address in here. I'm going to hit save. And that's going to be my input. We're going to pass an email address, and we're going to use that as the data element to assess in our truth table. So if I grab the email address, and then the verb that I want to use is that we're just going to say email address equals, so we can make sure that they are the correct email addresses. Right, now we have the email address. And then we can also decide what we want them to output. So we can change this data. So let's say I want strings, and I wanted this to output the first and last names. So I'm going to have a first name section here. I'm going to hit an enter, and I'm going to do a last name here. So now I have two tables, or two outputs here, with email address equals first name and last name. Now you can actually see here it's trying to match things up with the external truth table report that I built. It's kind of faded in the background, but it's still not quite matching up. And so it does need us to edit that report and to fix this to make sure that everything does match together. So if I click on this again, you'll notice it's going to call out a couple things. First of all, it's noticing that I don't have a field called the email address, but I do have a field called the email address equals. That is directly referring to this section here, this column that I created for what I am trying to assess. So this is directly called the email address equals because it combines the input that I grabbed and the verb that I chose. There's also first name and last name. These ones actually do match up with the data that I grabbed in my data fields. So it's already able to understand and say, I'm looking for first name from this data field in my report and last name from that data field in my report. If those names didn't match up, then it wouldn't quite work. Let's say, for example, if I just put name for first name and I left it at that. If I go to edit my report, it is now going to tell me that the following fields are required: email address equals and name, because it doesn't recognize that name right away. However, I can change that and make sure that it can recognize these by changing these names. So you can change the names of the actual fields themselves, and if you do, they can actually match up better. And you'll notice down here under title, if I hit this drop down, the names that are appearing are actually the names that match the names on my truth table in the previous page. So this dropdown shows me email address equals as the first column, last name is that last column, and name is the middle column. So I can easily just pick email address equals and it'll change the title, associate email address equals with this email address field that I chose here, and also removes that requirement, that error that way it was throwing. So then I can easily see that details. And then I can do the same with first name. If I want first name to be associated with the name column that I created on my truth table, I go to my title, I can find name, change my title to name, and now that they match up, then it works perfectly. So you can immediately make sure that the names in the columns match up with the data fields if you know that ahead of time, or if if you're building really well, they probably already match up, and then it's easy to do. But maybe they don't match up because of the way that you want to track your data versus the way you want it to be displayed in the report or something. You want those names to be a little bit, maybe one was more readable than the other or something like that. Then it's very easy to just change them on the report to match up and correspond. From here, though, this report itself is actually done. It is displaying all the information, and I can save and close this, and whatever I see, that data will appear down here as well. So now I can say, hey, if the email address matches up, what is the first name that gets associated with them, the last name that gets associated with them, I see that data. And I can add whatever I need to when I'm building with those things. Right, so it's very easy. I do also have the ability to add my has no match outcome if I wanted to change those adjustments. You still have the ability to filter this report. So if you do want some kind of filter on this based on certain data or certain things, you can have that data get filtered. So then all the data that appears in your truth table itself is also filtered according to that. So that's another option you have when you're working in here as well. So you have different things like that when you're working. And then if I simply add or remove any of this data, if I open up my truth table, that data will also still persist with whatever I've added or removed in my process. So if I go over here and I go to create some data, let me just create a really quick flow to create data. So now I'll go ahead and I created a quick example here. We're going to create one more entity. I'm going to go ahead and just run this really quick so it saves. So now we've created another item inside that structure. And if I simply close out of this and go back, open up my truth table again, I now see, since that is data that exists, that is data that got saved into my report, that data did get saved. So now I can also see that that data is in my truth table as well. So that's how an external truth table can be used to really demonstrate and show off, your truth tables and change that data. So now anytime I make changes to that data, it persists in my truth table. And again, this can come from external sources as well. So maybe I have some other external data structure or an external database that I'm pulling from. And then as long as I have a connection between decisions and that external database, I can very easily grab that. One more quick thing to add here as well. I did mention that you can also use like a CSV or an Excel file or something if you're looking for that. So under data sources, you can also search for CSV and Excel data source, and you can actually source this structure directly from that CSV file. So if you simply pass in your file through here, you can easily grab that and structure it in that way. So if you're trying to have your data come in through some kind of downloadable CSV or something, you can easily replace that in here. And then if you need to update it, you can easily come in and just make a quick update to your CSV file or upload a new one, and it should relate all of your details accordingly, allow you to add the fields and whatnot so that it matches based on the fields and columns of the input CSV. So not only can you do that with your CSVs, but you can also add any data structures that you built in decisions, any data structures that are internal to decisions like accounts or assignments, and then any other structures that you've added externally in any other way. As long as you can report on it and you do what I've followed through here to make sure that your data fields match with your truth table on the other side, then you can build a working external truth table that requires much less work to maintain in some ways as opposed to a regular truth table. Hopefully that helps and gives you some good ideas on how to use truth tables in decisions. Thank you for watching.